At my daughter-in-law's baby shower, I noticed the music stopped before I even felt her hand across my face. The room had been full of soft laughter just seconds earlier. Pink and gold balloons floated near the ceiling. A long table by the window displayed frosted cupcakes with tiny sugar rattles on top. Someone had just finished a silly guessing game about baby names. And then, her palm struck my cheek. Not hard enough to knock me down. Hard enough to silence the room. "Useless old woman," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "If you're going to stand there, at least clean something." For a moment, no one moved. My son froze beside the punch bowl, his hand still wrapped around a plastic ladle. One of her friends gasped softly, then looked down at her shoes. A fork clattered somewhere near the gift table. I didn't raise my hand to my face. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I simply adjusted the sleeve of my navy cardigan, the one I had ironed carefully that morning, and looked at her. "If you're new here, I'm glad you found me. Stay with me until the end, and tell me where you're watching from. I've learned that stories like mine travel farther than we think." That baby shower was supposed to be a celebration. My first grandchild. My only son's child. I had been counting the days. I woke up at 6 a.m. that morning, long before the sun fully rose over my small Ohio neighborhood. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in after you've lived alone for too long. I made myself a cup of black coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching a thin layer of frost melt off the grass. I had spent the previous week preparing something special. Not something flashy. Not something expensive. Something meaningful. In my bedroom closet, wrapped in tissue paper, was a hand-stitched baby quilt, pale yellow with soft green trim. I started sewing it 3 months ago, the day my son Daniel told me they were expecting. I chose neutral colors because they said they wanted the gender to be a surprise. Each square had a tiny embroidered detail. A rocking horse. A small oak tree. A little house with smoke curling from the chimney. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be at 72. But I took my time. 32 evenings. 2 sore thumbs. 1 quiet prayer stitched into every seam. I imagined my grandchild wrapped in it someday. I imagined being invited over on Sunday afternoons, holding the baby while Daniel grilled burgers in the backyard, hearing someone call me grandma in a voice too small to pronounce it correctly. That morning, I placed the quilt carefully in a white gift box and tied a satin ribbon around it. I even added a small card for the little one. "May you always feel safe and loved." I drove myself to the venue just before noon. It was held in the clubhouse of a new housing development where Daniel and his wife, Brittany, had recently moved. The building smelled faintly of fresh paint and vanilla candles. A large banner near the entrance read, "Welcome Baby Harper." Brittany had chosen the name, though she insisted they hadn't decided yet. She liked to control the narrative. Even before the baby was born. When I walked in, a few heads turned. I smiled. Not too wide. Just polite. Brittany stood near the dessert table wearing a pale pink maternity dress that hugged her belly tightly. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders. She looked radiant. I'll give her that. But when her eyes met mine, something flickered. Not joy. Not warmth. I stepped forward and handed her the gift. "For the baby," I said softly. She took it with 2 fingers, like it might stain her. "You didn't have to," she replied, her voice sweet enough to fool anyone who didn't know her. I leaned in slightly. "I wanted to." Daniel approached then, placing a hand lightly on her back. He gave me a quick side hug, the kind you give a distant aunt at a reunion. "Glad you made it, Mom," he said. Made it. As if I lived across the country instead of 20 minutes away. As if I hadn't raised him in a 2-bedroom house where I worked double shifts at the diner to keep the lights on after his father died. The games began shortly after. Guess the baby food flavor. Measure the belly with a string. Laugh. Applaud. Sip sparkling cider from plastic champagne flutes. I stood near the back for most of it. Watching. Smiling when expected. At one point, I noticed the trash can near the gift table was overflowing. Paper plates stacked awkwardly. Napkins spilling onto the floor. Without thinking, I bent down and picked up a few crumpled napkins. It's an old habit. When you spend your life hosting Thanksgiving dinners and church potlucks, you clean as you go. That's when she walked over. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. "If you're going to be here," Brittany said quietly at first, "you might as well make yourself useful." I straightened up slowly. "I was just helping," I answered. She looked at the napkins in my hand, and then back at my face. Her smile tightened. "You've always loved playing the martyr," she said louder now. cleaning up after everyone like it makes you important. A few nearby guests shifted uncomfortably. I felt heat rise along my cheekbones, but my voice stayed calm. "It's your day," I said. I didn't mean to interfere. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. She stepped closer. Too close. "You know what interferes?" she said. "You." Daniel was only a few feet away. He heard her. He didn't step in. "Ever since we got married, you've acted like this baby belongs to you," she continued, her tone climbing. "Like you're entitled to something." "I never said that," I replied. "You don't have to," she snapped. And then, her hand came out of nowhere. The sound was sharp. Clean. Like a book slamming shut. Gasps. Silence. My head turned slightly with the force, but I stayed standing. I tasted something metallic at the back of my tongue. "Useless old woman," she said, now fully performing for the room. "If you want to hang around, clean. That's all you're good for." Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Daniel's face had gone pale. But he didn't move. Didn't speak. In that suspended moment, I saw everything clearly. Not just the slap. Not just the insult. But the years leading up to it. The way Brittany had slowly edged me out of holidays. The way phone calls became shorter. The way Daniel stopped asking my advice. The way I was invited late. Or not at all. I placed the napkins gently on the table. I looked at my son. He looked away. And that was when something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not humiliation. Something colder. Steadier. I picked up my purse from the chair near the wall. "I'll head home," I said quietly. No one tried to stop me. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Brittany laugh softly behind me, as if nothing had happened. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright. I stood by my car for a moment, letting the air hit my face where her hand had landed. It didn't hurt anymore, but it had woken something up. I drove home slowly, obeyed every speed limit, stopped fully at every sign. When I pulled into my driveway, the house greeted me the way it always did, silent, dependable, unchanged. I set my purse down on the kitchen counter and walked to the hallway mirror. A faint red mark lingered on my cheek. I touched it gently. Then I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I finally understood something Brittany didn't. She thought she had embarrassed a weak old woman. What she had actually done was underestimate the last person standing between her and everything she wanted. And the next morning, I went to the bank. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30 a.m. Earlier than usual. The house was still dark, the sky outside a pale gray blue that comes just before sunrise. For a few seconds, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, letting the events from the day before settle into something solid. My cheek no longer burned, but the silence in that clubhouse still echoed in my mind. Not the slap, the silence after it. Daniel saying nothing. I sat up slowly and placed my feet on the cold hardwood floor. At 72, you don't jump out of bed. You measure your movements. You respect your balance. I made coffee. Black. No sugar. The same way my late husband, Thomas, used to drink it. He always said sweetness should come from people, not from a cup. I stood by the kitchen sink, watching steam rise from the mug. For years after Thomas passed, I told myself I was lucky. Lucky to have a son. Lucky he married. Lucky a baby was on the way. I ignored the small things. The Christmas I wasn't invited because they wanted something intimate. The Sunday dinners that slowly stopped. The way Brittany began introducing me as Daniel's mom, instead of just mom. Small shifts. Quiet exclusions. Yesterday wasn't sudden. It was just louder. I carried my coffee to the dining table and opened the folder I had placed there the night before. A simple manila folder. Nothing dramatic. Inside were copies of property documents, bank statements, and one paper Brittany had never seen. When Thomas and I bought this house 34 years ago, we put it in my name. It was a practical decision back then. His job involved liability risks. We were careful people. After he died, I updated my will. Not out of suspicion. Out of order. Everything was structured clearly. Thoughtfully. Daniel would inherit the house. But not immediately. Not jointly. Not by pressure. There were conditions. Respect was one of them. Not written in emotional language. Written in legal terms. I took another sip of coffee and let that reality settle. Brittany thought power came from volume. From humiliation. From making someone feel small in a crowded room. But power doesn't work that way. Real power is quiet. It waits. At 9 a.m., I changed into a pressed beige coat and low-heeled shoes. I brushed my hair back neatly and applied a light touch of lipstick. Not for anyone else. For myself. I locked the house and drove to the bank. The same branch Thomas and I had used for decades. When I stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. Familiar. Steady. I approached the front desk and asked to speak with Mr. Henderson. He'd been our account manager for years. He attended Thomas's funeral. He knew history when he saw it. As I waited, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt clear. Yesterday, Brittany raised her hand in public. Today, I was raising mine quietly. Not to strike, but to sign. Mr. Henderson came out of his office within a few minutes. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him. More gray at the temples. But his handshake was the same, steady, respectful. Mrs. Whitmore, he said gently. It's been a while. It has, I replied. Thank you for seeing me. We sat across from each other in his glass-walled office. The bank was quiet for a Tuesday morning. A young teller laughed softly somewhere near the front desk. A printer hummed. Normal sounds. Ordinary life. Mr. Henderson folded his hands. How can I help you today? I placed the manila folder on his desk and slid it toward him. I'd like to make some changes, I said. Not dramatic. Not rushed. Clear. He opened the folder and scanned the documents. His eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't interrupt. You're referring to the Joint Emergency Access Authorization? He asked. Yes. 3 years ago, after Thomas passed, Daniel insisted I add his name as an emergency contact on one of my accounts. Not ownership. Just access, in case something happened. Back then, it felt reasonable. A son helping his widowed mother. Now, it felt like a door I no longer wanted open. I'd like that revoked, I said. Effective immediately. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. Of course. May I ask if everything is all right? I held his gaze. Everything is becoming clear, I answered. He didn't press further. Some men understand when silence means more than explanation. As he typed into his computer, I watched my reflection faintly in the glass beside him. My posture was straight. My hands were still. Yesterday, I had stood in a room full of people and been reduced to a punchline. Today, I was removing my name from being anyone's convenience. There's also the matter of the house, I continued. I'd like to place it into the trust as originally outlined. No informal adjustments. No verbal understandings. He paused, then nodded again. That can be done. Daniel always assumed the house would pass to him easily. Naturally. Automatically. He never asked about paperwork. He trusted momentum. But Thomas and I never relied on momentum. We relied on structure. 15 minutes later, the forms were printed. I signed where I needed to sign. Each stroke of the pen felt steady. Measured. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. When I stood to leave, Mr. Henderson walked me to the door. If you need anything else, he said, don't hesitate. I smiled politely. I won't. Outside, the late morning sun was warmer than the day before. I paused beside my car and took a slow breath. Brittany believed humiliation was power. She believed volume was control. But power doesn't shout. It moves quietly. That afternoon, my phone rang for the first time since the baby shower. Daniel's name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Mom, he said. His voice was careful. Too careful. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't the one trying to keep the peace. Hi, Mom. Daniel's voice sounded different. Not softer. Not warmer. Measured. I stood in my kitchen with the phone against my ear, my other hand resting lightly on the counter. The afternoon light filtered through the blinds, casting thin lines across the floor. Hello, Daniel, I replied. A small pause. About yesterday, he began. I waited. He cleared his throat. Brittany was stressed. You know how pregnancy hormones can be. She didn't mean. I didn't interrupt him. That's something I've learned over the years. When you let people keep talking, they reveal more than they intend. She's been overwhelmed, he continued. Planning the shower, getting the nursery ready, doctor appointments. She just snapped. It wasn't personal. Not personal. A hand across my face. A room full of witnesses. A word like useless thrown into the air. Not personal. I see, I said calmly. There was another silence. He wasn't used to me being this quiet. She feels bad, he added quickly. She said things got out of hand. I thought about the way she looked at me before she lifted her hand. That wasn't panic. That wasn't stress. That was intention. Daniel, I said gently, did you feel bad? He didn't answer right away. I didn't expect it to go that far, he said finally. That wasn't what I asked. I moved to the dining table and sat down slowly. When your father was alive, I said, keeping my voice even, there was a rule in this family. He exhaled softly. Mom, no raised hands. I continued. No raised voices. Especially not in public. That's not fair, he muttered. Fair. The word almost made me smile. Is it fair? I asked quietly. For your mother to be struck at a celebration for her own grandchild? He didn't respond. Instead, he shifted direction. Look, Mom. Brittany thinks maybe it's better if we create some space for a while. Until things calm down. Space. The same word they used last Christmas. The same word they used when I wasn't invited to the gender ultrasound. I think that's wise, I replied. He sounded surprised. You do? Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. I'll always love you, he said, softer now. Love. Love without protection feels very different. I know, I answered. Take care of your wife. I ended the call before he could say anything else. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. I placed the phone on the table and folded. My hands in my lap. Yesterday, I had been dismissed in public. Today, I was being distanced politely. But distance works both ways. They thought space would weaken me. They didn't realize space also protects. The house felt quieter after that call. Not heavier. Just clearer. When you stop trying to defend yourself, the air changes. The rooms feel different. The silence isn't empty anymore. It's settled. I stood up from the dining table and walked slowly to the hallway closet. On the top shelf sat a small wooden box Thomas had given me on our 25th anniversary. Cherry wood. Smooth edges. A brass hinge that still clicked softly when opened. Inside were documents we never discussed casually. Insurance papers. Trust agreements. Letters. Thomas believed in preparation. Not because he was suspicious. Because he understood people change when money, property, or comfort is involved. I carried the box to the living room and sat down in my armchair by the window. Outside, a delivery truck rolled past. A neighbor walked her dog. Life moving normally. Inside the box was a sealed envelope labeled in Thomas's handwriting. For Margaret, if you ever feel unprotected. I hadn't opened it in years. Carefully, I slid my finger beneath the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a smaller folded note. The formal page outlined a clause within the trust, one I had almost forgotten. If I were ever subjected to documented mistreatment or coercion by a direct beneficiary, their inheritance would convert into a conditional distribution. Not removed. Conditional. Time-based. Behavior-based. Reviewed by the executor. Thomas had chosen his older sister, Eleanor, as secondary executor if I ever felt compromised. I unfolded the smaller note. His handwriting was steady. You are never obligated to tolerate disrespect for the sake of peace. Peace without dignity is not peace. I read that sentence twice. Then I folded the paper carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Yesterday, Brittany thought she embarrassed me. Daniel thought distance would smooth things over. But neither of them understood something very simple. Structure protects what emotion cannot. That evening, around 7 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Not Daniel. Brittany. I let it ring once before answering. Her voice was tight. Margaret, she said, skipping Mom entirely. I think things got blown out of proportion. I listened. I've been under a lot of stress, she continued. And honestly, you make situations tense sometimes. Tense. I pictured her hand rising again in that pastel room. I won't argue with you, I replied calmly. There was a pause. She hadn't expected that. We just need boundaries, she said quickly. Especially once the baby comes. Boundaries. Yes, I said. We do. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain the bank visit. Or the trust clause. Or Eleanor's role. She believed control was still in her hands. I ended the call gently. Then I reached for my phone again and scrolled to a name I hadn't dialed in years. Eleanor Whitmore. Thomas's sister. The woman who had always watched quietly from the edges. I pressed call. Because sometimes, the strongest move isn't loud. It's informed. Eleanor answered on the third ring. Margaret. Her voice was low, steady. The same voice that had read scripture at Thomas's funeral without trembling. It's me, I said. A pause. Not awkward. Just attentive. I was wondering when you might call, she replied. That didn't surprise me. Eleanor had always been observant. She didn't insert herself into situations, but she noticed them. I need to review the trust, I said plainly. All right, she answered. No questions. No dramatics. Has something happened? Yes. Another small pause. Are you safe? I am. That seemed to satisfy her. We agreed to meet the following afternoon at her home. She lived about 40 minutes away, in the same brick house she and her late husband had bought in the early 70s. Nothing flashy. Solid. Maintained. After I hung up, I sat still for a moment. Calling Eleanor wasn't escalation. It was alignment. Thomas trusted her because she valued order over emotion. She didn't respond to tears. She responded to facts. The next day, I dressed simply. Gray slacks, a cream blouse, low heels. I drove through familiar roads lined with bare maple trees and small-town storefronts that hadn't changed in decades. Eleanor opened the door before I knocked. She studied my face carefully, not searching for weakness. Assessing. You look composed, she said. I am, I replied. We sat at her dining table with the trust documents spread neatly between us. No raised voices. No sympathy speeches. Just paper. Ink. Structure. I want to activate the review clause, I said. She looked up slowly. Are you certain? Yes. Has there been documented misconduct? Yes. I described the baby shower. Calmly. Factually. No embellishment. No dramatic pauses. Eleanor listened without interruption. When I finished, she folded her hands. Was your son present? He was. And did he intervene? No, she nodded once. That was all. The clause allows for conditional suspension pending behavioral review, she said. It doesn't remove him. It delays access and places terms. I understand. And you're prepared for the reaction? I met her eyes. Yes. Because this wasn't about punishment. It was about clarity. For years, I tried to preserve harmony. Now I was preserving boundaries. Eleanor reached for her pen. I'll notify the attorney to formalize the review, she said. Outside her window, a light breeze moved through the trees. Subtle. Controlled. Inside, something else shifted. Not anger. Not revenge. Authority. By the time I drove home that evening, my phone had 3 missed calls from Daniel. I didn't rush to return them. For the first time in a long time, they were waiting on me. When I got home that evening, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't call anyone back. I placed my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, hung my coat carefully in the closet, and walked into the kitchen as if it were any other day. Routine steadies the mind. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the table where Thomas used to read the newspaper every Sunday morning. The house felt different now, not lonely. Grounded. My phone buzzed again. Daniel. I let it ring twice before answering. Mom, why haven't you called me back? His voice was tight. Not angry. Uneasy. I've been busy, I replied. With what? He pressed. I folded my hands neatly on the table, putting things in order. There was a pause on the line. What does that mean? It means I met with Eleanor. Silence. Longer this time. Why would you do that? He asked, and I could hear something under the question. Not concern. Alarm. Because she's co-executor of your father's trust, I answered calmly. You know that. I thought that was just technical, he said quickly. That's for paperwork, Mom. Not for family disagreements. Family disagreements. That wasn't a disagreement, Daniel, I said. It was an action. He exhaled sharply. So what are you saying? I've requested a formal review. The words were simple. Measured. Another silence. You're overreacting, he said at last. This is about a moment. One moment. No, I replied softly. It's about a pattern. He didn't argue that. He shifted instead. Brittany is pregnant, he said. Stress affects her. The baby. You know that. I looked out the window at the fading light across my backyard. I never raised my hand to you, I said quietly. Not once. Not even when I was exhausted. Not even when money was tight. Respect was never optional in this house. That's not the same thing, he muttered. You're right, I agreed. It isn't. Because discipline and humiliation are not the same. I don't want things to get ugly, he added. They won't, I said. Unless someone makes them. He hesitated. I could almost hear him recalculating. What does this review mean? He asked carefully. It means access is paused, I answered. Until terms are clarified. For how long? That depends. On what? On behavior. There it was. The word neither of them liked. His tone shifted again, softer now. Mom, we were counting on that house eventually. Eventually. Yes, I said. Eventually. And eventually requires patience. I never thought you'd use money like this, he said quietly. I'm not using money, I replied. I'm using structure. There was nothing more for him to say. After we hung up, I set the phone down gently. Yesterday, I was the woman standing in the corner with napkins in her hand. Today, I was the one defining terms. And for the first time since Thomas died, I didn't feel unprotected. The following morning, the house felt unusually still. Not tense, just watchful. When people realize access is no longer automatic, they start measuring their tone, their words, their timing. At 8:17 a.m., my phone lit up again. Not Daniel. Brittany. I let it ring once before answering. Margaret, she began, her voice controlled, almost pleasant. Daniel told me you contacted Eleanor. Yes, I said. A short pause. That feels extreme, she continued. We're family. Family. I leaned back in my kitchen chair and looked at the calendar hanging near the fridge. The baby shower date still circled in pink marker. Family doesn't remove consequences, I replied calmly. Her breathing shifted slightly. Not louder, just sharper. This is about a misunderstanding, she insisted. You know how emotional things get at events like that. I do, I answered. I've hosted many. She ignored that. You're jeopardizing stability, she said. With a baby coming, this isn't the time to create financial uncertainty. Financial uncertainty. The phrase was carefully chosen. Stability, I said gently, begins with behavior. Another silence. She tried a different approach. We've always included you, she said. You're making it sound like we've mistreated you for years. I didn't raise my voice. I wasn't included last Christmas, I said. Or the ultrasound. Or the 4th of July barbecue. That was scheduling, she snapped. No, I replied. That was pattern. Her tone hardened slightly. So what exactly do you want? There it was. Not apology. Not reconciliation. Terms. I want clarity, I said. And acknowledgement. For what? For what happened? She exhaled slowly. I said I was stressed. That is an acknowledgement, I answered. Another pause. I can't undo it, she said at last. No, I agreed. You can't. The air between us felt thinner now. Daniel came onto the line suddenly, his voice overlapping hers. Mom, this doesn't have to escalate. It hasn't escalated, I said evenly. It's been documented. He fell quiet again. What would it take? He asked carefully. I let the question sit for a moment. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted him to hear the weight of it. It would take respect, I said. Not performance. Not panic. Respect. Neither of them responded immediately, because respect isn't a quick fix. It isn't a text message. It isn't a public smile after a private insult. It's consistent, measured, visible. I'll talk to Eleanor again after the attorney formalizes the review, I added. Until then, there's nothing more to discuss. This time, I ended the call first. Not abruptly, just decisively. I set my phone down and stood at the kitchen window, watching a light wind move through the trees in my yard. They thought this was about money, about a house, about timing. It wasn't. It was about something far older than property. Authority shifts quietly, and once it shifts, it doesn't ask permission to stay. 2 days passed without another call. That, more than anything, told me the message had landed. When people are confident, they argue. When they're uncertain, they calculate. On Thursday morning, a certified envelope arrived in my mailbox. I recognized the law firm's name immediately. The same firm Thomas had used for decades. The same firm Eleanor contacted after our meeting. I carried the envelope inside, placed it on the kitchen counter, and removed my coat slowly before opening it. No rush. Inside was a formal notice. Trust review initiated. Conditional suspension of beneficiary access pending conduct assessment. Clean language. Professional tone. No emotion. Exactly how it should be. I folded the letter carefully and set it beside my coffee cup. At 10:42 a.m., my phone rang again. Daniel. This time, I answered on the first ring. Mom, we received something in the mail, he said. No greeting. I assumed you would, I replied. His voice wasn't sharp. It was strained. They're saying access is paused indefinitely. Conditionally, I corrected gently. Not indefinitely. You know what that means, he said. We were planning renovations. We've been budgeting around. I never approved renovations, I said calmly. Silence. Longer this time. You always said the house would be mine. It will be, I answered. Eventually. But now there are requirements. Yes. I let that word settle. Mom, this makes it look like we did something unforgivable. I didn't react to the phrasing. I didn't write the clause, I said. Your father did. That shifted the weight immediately. Thomas wasn't someone Daniel challenged lightly, even in memory. He wouldn't want this kind of division, Daniel argued. Your father valued respect, I replied. Above comfort. Another silence. Then, more quietly, Brittany is scared. Of course she was. Fear is often the first step toward reflection, I said. That sounds like a warning. It's not. It was a statement. He exhaled slowly. What do you want from us? I had already answered that question. Consistency, I said. Not apologies in private and performances in public. He didn't interrupt. For now, I continued, the review stands. Eleanor and the attorney will outline behavioral terms. After that, we'll move forward accordingly. And if we don't agree? I looked out the window again at the backyard Thomas built with his own hands. The fence he repaired twice. The oak tree he planted when Daniel was born. Then the structure remains, I said. No anger. No threats. Just reality. After we hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt balanced. Yesterday, Brittany believed a raised hand would shrink me. Today, paperwork was doing what volume never could. Shifting expectation. And in that shift, the tone of every future conversation had already changed. By Friday afternoon, the shift was no longer subtle. It was visible. Daniel showed up at my front door at 3:12 p.m. I know the time because I had just finished watering the small row of potted herbs by the kitchen window. He didn't text first. He didn't call. He knocked. 3 firm taps. I dried my hands on a dish towel before walking to the door. When I opened it, he looked tired. Not angry. Just unsettled. Can I come in? He asked. You may, I replied, stepping aside. He walked into the living room slowly, as if the house felt different to him. Maybe it did. Spaces carry memory. And authority. He didn't sit right away. Mom, this has gone too far, he began. Sit, I said gently. He sat across from me on the sofa where he used to fall asleep watching cartoons at age 8. This review. Brittany is panicking, he said. She thinks you're trying to cut us off. I'm not cutting anyone off, I answered calmly. I'm clarifying terms. She's pregnant, he repeated, as if that sentence erased everything. I am aware, I said. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You could have just talked to us. I did, I replied. At the baby shower. His jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. That was a mistake, he said finally. It shouldn't have happened. Correct, I answered. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. You've never done anything like this before, he said quietly. No, I agreed. I've never needed to. The room fell silent. For years, I absorbed small dismissals. Shortened invitations. Polite distance. I convinced myself it was generational. Modern boundaries. New families adjusting. But a raised hand changes categories. Mom, he said again, softer now. What exactly has to happen for this to go away? There it was. Not apology. Resolution. Nothing goes away, I said. It either improves or it remains. He swallowed. The attorney will outline behavioral expectations, I continued. Public acknowledgement. Written apology. Clear boundaries. No further hostility. That's humiliating, he said. I held his gaze. Yes, I answered. The word hung between us. Humiliation feels different when you're the one experiencing it. He leaned back slowly. I didn't think you'd actually enforce something like this, he admitted. That's the problem, I replied gently. You didn't think I would. Outside, a car passed down the street. Ordinary noise. Ordinary life continuing. Inside, the balance had already shifted. I love you, he said finally. I know, I answered. Love without respect is fragile. And for the first time since Brittany raised her hand, they understood that access to my silence was no longer guaranteed. It had terms. Daniel didn't stay long after that. He stood near the doorway for a moment, as if he wanted to say something else. Something softer. Something that would undo the paperwork already in motion. But he didn't. He left with a quiet, we'll figure this out. I closed the door gently behind him and locked it, the familiar click echoing in the hallway. That evening, just before 8 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a call. It was a message. From Brittany. I opened it slowly. I think we need to talk. In person. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just need. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat in my usual chair by the living room lamp. The light cast a soft circle over the wooden floor. Thomas used to sit across from me in the evenings, reading quietly while I knitted. He always said, people show you who they are the second time. not the first. The first time can be emotion. The second time is character. My phone buzzed again. Another message. I'm willing to do what's required. That was new. Not because of humility, because of consequence. I replied with a single sentence. Eleanor will coordinate through the attorney. No emotion. No lecture. No invitation. A few minutes later, Daniel called again. Brittany wants to fix this, he said. She can, I replied. She's embarrassed. I thought about that word. Embarrassment fades quickly when it isn't structured. Embarrassment is temporary, I said. Respect is sustained. He was quiet. She didn't think you'd actually respond like this, he admitted. That's clear, I answered. Another pause. Mom, are you still going to be part of the baby's life? There it was. Not the house. Not the trust. The child. I let the silence breathe before answering. That depends, I said carefully, on whether that child grows up watching their grandmother dismissed or respected. He didn't argue, because he understood. Children absorb what they witness, and I would not model tolerance for humiliation. I don't want my child to think that's normal, he said quietly. Then correct it, I replied. After we hung up, I sat alone in the quiet house again. But the quiet felt different now. Not fragile. Steady. Brittany had raised her hand in public. She believed the room would protect her. Instead, structure did what silence could not. For the first time, the conversation wasn't about smoothing things over. It was about repair. And repair only begins when accountability enters the room. 3 weeks later, I stood in the same clubhouse where Brittany had raised her hand. But this time, the room was quiet for a different reason. The attorney had finalized the behavioral agreement. Eleanor had signed as co-executor. Daniel and Brittany had signed as beneficiaries under review. Not stripped. Not disinherited. Structured. Part of the agreement required a public acknowledgement of the incident and a written apology entered into record. Not for humiliation. For accountability. Brittany stood near the center of the room that afternoon, her hands folded over her stomach. The pastel decorations were gone now. Just plain walls. Folding chairs. Neutral space. Daniel stood beside her. I stood across from them. No audience of laughing friends. No balloons. No performance. Her voice wasn't loud this time. I acted inappropriately, she said, eyes lowered. I disrespected you publicly. That was wrong. The words were careful, practiced, but they were spoken. Daniel added quietly. I should have intervened. I didn't. That won't happen again. Silence followed. Not heavy. Measured. I didn't rush to fill it. Respect is not restored by speed. It is restored by consistency. I accept the acknowledgement, I said. Not warmly. Not coldly. Clearly. The trust review would remain active for 1 year. No further hostility. No exclusion from family events. No verbal or physical disrespect. If violated, distribution terms would change permanently. Structure. Not revenge. 2 months later, my grandchild was born. A little girl. Harper Grace. Daniel called me from the hospital. Mom, he said, his voice softer than I'd heard it in years. She's here. I visited the next day. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and baby powder. Machines hummed quietly in the background. Brittany looked tired. Not radiant this time. Just human. When she handed me Harper, she did it carefully. Respectfully. The baby was small. Warm. Wrapped in a soft blanket with tiny pink stripes. As I held her, I didn't think about the slap. I didn't think about paperwork. I thought about continuity. About what children learn. Without being told, Brittany watched me quietly. Thank you for coming, she said. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just steady. I'm her grandmother, I replied. Later, when I returned home, I opened the closet and took out the quilt I had stitched months ago. I drove back to their house that evening and placed it gently in the nursery crib. The oak tree square rested near her tiny hands. 32 evenings. 2 sore thumbs. 1 quiet prayer in every seam. This time, no one told me to clean. No one raised their voice. No one raised their hand. Authority had shifted. Not because I shouted. Not because I threatened. But because I refused to accept humiliation disguised as family. Thomas once wrote, "Peace without dignity is not peace." Now, as I sit in my living room holding a photograph of Harper sleeping, I understand that fully. Respect isn't demanded. It's demonstrated. And once you teach people that your silence has structure, they learn to speak to you differently. I never needed to be louder. I just needed to be clear.